As a 13-year-old, after the war in Bosnia, I was educated in school against landmines.
So I still get goosebumps when I talk about it, and I'm having those goosebumps right now. It was the first time ever a conventional weapon was completely, absolutely, totally banned.
This is Silent Killers, a podcast from Face to Face and the international campaign to ban landmines. In 1997, the world said enough and signed the Mine Ban Treaty, but landmines are still claiming lives in many countries around the world. In this series, we meet survivors, frontline workers, and global change makers, all fighting for a mine-free world. From Cambodia to the Ukraine, the danger is real. The work is urgent, and the path to peace is possible. Step by step, and yet still under our feet. This is Silent Killers. Well, welcome back to Silent Killers. This is episode 2, the Mine Ban Treaty, Why the Renewed Interest. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that wherever you listen to podcasts. And we're going to continue to remind you to share this with family and friends. This is an important podcast. It's an important series. It's going to be 10 episodes. We're hoping this is going to be around for a long time. Sadly, the issue of landmines and disarmament and so on will be here with us for many more years, or at least so it seems. And we are hoping that people will dive in. They'll learn about the issue. They'll get involved. They'll activate, and they will become advocates in one way, shape, or form. And that's how these things happen. We're here to tell these stories, these personal stories. You're going to hear that from so many people that have been involved in this kind of work over so many years. Please subscribe, share it with family and friends, and more importantly, dive in and get involved if and when you can, if for no other reason than to start sharing this story with others, at least in your circles and in your communities. You'd be surprised at the splash and ripple effect and how these things grow. We have two advocates with us here today to talk about disarmament, to talk about the issues surrounding landmines and the treaty and so on. Alma Taslidzan is here with us, and Kasia, Derlicka-Rosenbauer as well, joining us here. Episode 2, Silent Killers. Stay tuned. My name is David Peck. Well, welcome back to Silent Killers, and we are thrilled to be joined by a couple of very special guests here with us today. It's always a real pleasure for me as a podcaster, as somebody who's been working in this sector for so many years, to be able to step into conversations with advocates, with activists, with experts, really. And we have two of those here with us today on Silent Killers, this episode, to talk about a lot of things. Really, we're going to find out a little bit about the two of them, but we're also going to find out about the issues around what's happening around the world. And so thank you so much for joining us here on this episode. We have Kasia Derlicka-Rosenbauer here with us and Alma Taslidzan here as well. Thank you for joining us. Did I pronounce your names right? Alma, was it close? Was it pretty good?
It was very close. It was Taslidzan, but
Taslidzan. I knew it. I had it. Kasia, how about you?
It's pretty good. This is the international standard of my name. The real one in Polish would be Derlicka-Rosenbauer, but I'm really used to.
See, my last name is just so easy, right? It's just like one syllable, right? And my son said to me the other day, he said, "Dad, somebody actually asked me if I was related to Gregory Peck." And so I grew up, of course, people asking me that. And my cousin was Greg Peck. So, of course, I could, with certainty say that, yes, I'm related to Gregory Peck. And just the question I have, though, right now is how many of our listeners actually know who Gregory Peck was? That is the trivia question of the day. So anyway, thank you both for joining us here on this podcast, for this interview. I mean, these are serious matters. These are serious times. We're stepping into a conversation to say that you don't have to dig too deep onto the BBC or the New York Times or Al Jazeera to know that we are living in a difficult time. And so thanks for joining us here for the conversation. Alma, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about who you are and Kasia, you as well. But Alma, I wondered if you could give us a little bit of an overview of why are you a part of this conversation around disarmament, around landmines, and these things that we're calling silent killers?
Well, when I get to speak to people that have never heard about what we fight when we fight against landmines, I just say that my job is to 24 hours think and speak against these silent killers. I think my background and where I was born and bred gave me this path to be a strong and very vocal advocate against the use of landmines, cluster munitions, and also explosive weapons in populated areas. That has been my work for the last 15 years. Oh, wow, that is a long time now. Now that I said it out loud, that's really a long time. But, at one stage, it was maybe a little bit of a boring work because landmines were such a boring weapons that nobody wanted to use. And the Landmine Treaty was just the perfect document that was being implemented by so many states. But these days, our jobs has really changed drastically. And we are back at square one where we have to speak about how landmines are horrible and how they kill civilians and how they blow bodies apart and how civilians are really struggling when they're living in conflict-affected areas, specifically contaminated with landmines. So that's my job. It's quite interesting. I'm very grateful for it. I get to meet people from all around the world, get to speak to incredible and amazing personalities. And guess what? Nobody knows how to pronounce my surname again. so that's the habit I get.
So what you're saying, Alma, is I'm in good company. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So yeah, that's few words about what I do and why I do it. I'm working for a humanitarian organization that is called Humanity and Inclusion. It's also known as Handicap International. And the fact that we are so widespread around the world where we do activities that are assisting most vulnerable population, I really get the chance to speak to diversity of people, and I'm really grateful for that.
Alma, quick question, before we head to Kasia's story a little bit, and I know it's just so unfair in some respects to assume that you're able, we don't have the time to go really deep, I suppose, but if you're comfortable with it, was it a personal story that pulled you in? Was it an experience that pulled you in, something, somewhere, sometime that you can say, you know what, it was that day where, anyway, I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, there is specifically a moment where I started or I decided or really went passionate about why I want to do this job that I'm doing right now. But as a 13-year-old, after the war in Bosnia, I was educated in school against landmines. There was a part of a school curriculum where a big military man would come into our class and he would show off all the types of landmines and educate us children on how we should act if we get into a minefield and what we should not do and what we should do. It was a sad moment that children of 12, 11, 13, that kind of age are educated on how they would help their peers if they are injured as well. How do they call for help if they find themselves in the middle of a minefield? So it was the beginning of an era of myself living in that area and being very cautious about what landmines are and hearing here and there that, one exploded and the father of a cousin or this one or that one got injured. And it was a heavy period that kind of normalized the presence of landmines in your life, that you have to be very, very cautious with the fact that they are there and they cannot be just removed like that. And they are going to be an obstacle and a reminder every time you go to visit our beautiful Bosnian mountains. When you walk around the river, you're just wondering, is it really safe here to walk around? But years and years later, I was working as a journalist and I was passing by the mining site. I was actually covering a story of a dead poet, 100 years of anniversary of a dead poet, and we were going really remotely on a cemetery. And I saw a group of the miners and I thought, these landmines, they're just a curse. They just don't go away. They're there and they're just there all the time. And it takes so much time to get them out. And how come that a country that goes through this horrible war gets that curse that has to fight with those killers years and years and years later. I'm talking now about maybe 20 years after the war that we were. And guess what? We are now 30 years and we're still battling that enemy.
Yeah, it really is a remarkable thing. I love how you say they're an obstacle and a reminder. Kasia, can you tell us a little bit about your story and why, your involvement with the international campaign to ban landmines, and you're an advocate. We're all advocates really here, I suppose, just even having this conversation, but you've really stepped into this in a significant way. I'd love to hear more about that.
Thanks a lot, David. So similarly to Alma, I've been involved with this campaign and being an advocate for a long time. And I kind of got involved by just kind of, it was a coincidence as we often have it in our life. It was back in 1997, actually, when I was first exposed to landmines. By coincidence, I ended up in Germany volunteering with an NGO, Friedensdorf International, which in English means Peace Village. Basically, this NGO was bringing kids from all around the world, from conflict zones, from different conflict situations, wars, and was treating them in Germany. And my job was to take care, kind of entertain those kids, help them. And many of those kids were actually landmine survivors from Cambodia, Bosnia, Angola, many other places. And this is the first time I actually saw that, oh my God, these weapons actually still exist. It's not only a kind of a thing related to the Second World War that was very much in my mind at that time. Coming from Poland, I associated it with the past, with, this Second World War done and gone. And then I saw, oh my God, they are really there. And those kids are missing legs and hands and they are blind because of landmines. And so it really got me intrigued. And I, at that time, I was very much actually interested in environmental issues, not so much in humanitarian issues, but that was the kind of a changing point for me. These images of these kids were haunting me so badly that I started to follow this issue. And that same year, this treaty to ban landmines was negotiated and adopted, and it was all over the newspapers. And I was still at the university, and shortly after I decided how about I write my master's thesis about this campaign, this treaty, this issue. And of course, being in Poland, I could not find any materials, anything available. So I started like a mad woman, sending messages all around wherever I could find an organization to please help me because I need these materials. And the ICBL and the Landmine Monitor wrote back to me and said, hey, we've got heaps of information. We can send it to you. But by the way, we don't have anyone in Poland working on these issues. Would you like to get involved? And at that point, I had no idea what that meant and what that would, look like. But I said, oh, yes, of course. I mean, hearing back from this international acclaimed organizations and people, it sounded too fascinating and too interesting to say no. So I did. And here I am, 25 years after, really. I first started doing research in Poland. I found out that my country, the country of my origin, did not join the treaty, that it still stockpiled anti-personnel mines and was ready to use them in case it needed it. So naturally, from this research side, I became a campaigner and determined to bring my own country on board of the treaty. And so it happened. And today I am especially frustrated, angry, outraged. I don't know what else I can say. Seeing my country walking away from this treaty with the 4 other countries. So this is really a moment of reflection, having spent 25 years of my life on these issues, on fighting this weapon, to seeing how it is creeping back in a way in Europe, in my own country, and we are fearing that maybe this means also that all the progress and all the success we have achieved together over those 25 years plus we are now going to be witnessing how it is all, I don't know how to call it, basically damaged, questioned, rolled backwards.
Yeah, undermined, I suppose, right, in some respects. Kasia, why do you think it was such a landmark for humanitarian disarmament, the 97 treaty. I mean, it sounds like you were pulled in fairly quickly, and we can talk about you now, this is 28 years later, I guess. And then 99, I believe the Ottawa Treaty was actually signed and so on. And we're hoping listeners are going to listen to this whole series of interviews on this podcast, and they're going to learn a lot about not only the treaty, but the issues themselves. Why do you think it was such a milestone? It was clearly one of a kind.
It was. And, I still get goosebumps when I talk about it. And I'm having those goosebumps right now.
I just got a few myself. So there you go. How's that?
I think whoever got across this issue, we have, wandered to this most exceptional territory. It was so extraordinary, and it still is. It was the first time ever a conventional weapon was completely, absolutely, totally banned, meaning production, use, stockpiling was banned. It has never happened before until 1997 when the treaty was negotiated and then signed. It was also the first time ever that a disarmament treaty had this very positive humanitarian obligations. There is obligation to actually address the impact of the use of landmines. So, of course, the clearance of land, assistance to survivors. This sounds completely normal today, maybe to many, but it was an absolutely extraordinary, unprecedented achievement. So this convention has completely redefined how people thought about security in terms of human security, and it served as a model for many, many other instruments and processes and conventions that followed. So it's an amazing heritage, let's say. It's an amazing achievement. It was also the first time that the role of civil society was so fully in the forefront of these achievements. It was the civil society actually that pushed states to make it happen. Civil society, for the first time ever, was treated as an equal partner, was in the negotiations room, was at the negotiation table, was not just, the pacifists with out in the streets, but we were treated as an equal, informed, legitimate partner with wealth of knowledge, with wealth of expertise. And maybe what is also exceptional, survivors of this weapon were also at the forefront of this negotiations and these efforts. So really extraordinary. It brought together people from across different sectors, from defense to humanitarian, survivors, victims, all united to do something that has never happened before.
Yeah, Kasia, it sounds to me really like it really was that, we love to talk about this in the development sector, but top down and bottom up. It really sounds like there was an interdependent, almost like approach. There was a community. People were listening. This wasn't just about policy. This wasn't just about survivors, people on the ground. We were reconstructing a table and people were sitting down at it.
Absolutely.
It sounds really quite remarkable. Alma, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of those principles or kind of the threads, I guess. Does that make sense? The threads of what the Mine Ban Treaty was really all about. Some of those top-down, bottom-up kind of like principles where people were actually able to meet and sign this thing in 1999 in Ottawa and move forward, because I think it's important that we understand that context before we start talking about some of the liabilities and the vulnerabilities and the concerns that we have today.
Of course. Well, what Kasia explained, that momentum when we have goosebumps when a treaty is negotiated, I mean, it's blood and tears that we have before. It's decades of conversations, of negotiations, of closed-door discussions, of actually weighting human suffering. Is it bad? Is it good? And it's very difficult because every story, if you listen to survivors, they're all kind of, I don't want to say the same, but very similar. A person steps on a landmine and this is where chaos starts in their life, where all their life gets changed and if they survive the accident. But what happens up to that moment is that we really work long time and then we get to that treaty, but we know it's just a milestone. Then the work needs to start because all these states that signed the treaty, they now have to implement it. And who better than civil society to keep all our eyes open and see if that document that has been signed in Ottawa, later then on the Convention on Cluster Munitions in Oslo and the Political Declaration in Dublin and all these documents that we have that are safeguarding civilians and promoting the protection of civilians during and post-conflict, that they're used, that they are in full power, and that states really look into those norms that they have signed off in the situation of war and in the situation of peace. So for decades, we fought to build this global consensus. It was a norm that landmines are cruel. They're indiscriminate weapon of war. And we worked across borders, across different political divides, because landmines were back then also useful weapon for what they call defense these days. So it was really across different political divides and across generations as well, because we had generations of children whose parents were survivors of landmines. And there was only one voice that we were promoting, that these were weapons of past. They're just a reminder of bad choices that humankind can make. We want to put these weapons in a shelf in a museum and bring children and show them something that should never happen again, never to be used again. So we signed the treaty. We cleared landmine fields because that's an obligation of the Mine Ban Treaty. We still keep rehabilitating those victims and give them the dignity and the right that they as humans deserve. We taught children how to live in former war zones, how to recognize landmines, how to avoid this death that was buried just below their feet. Really and truly, the Ottawa Treaty was a milestone not only of diplomacy, but of basic human decency, I would say. It was just something that was absolutely necessary. It was considered to be a huge success. And when we saw treaty being implemented, so in the life of the treaty, there are annual meetings where states gather and they report on the progress, what they have achieved. It's called the treaty machinery. And then after every 5 years, we have this kind of 5-year review on what has been done. And there was always a huge mobilization to support countries that are affected by landmines, to provide support for victim assistance, to teach children against these weapons, and to really focus on the good of this treaty was supposed to do at the beginning and what it should still do. I mean, it's still relevant. Let's not get sidetracked. What we see now is that this norm that we have built that was very strong, that it's now being casually brushed aside. It's been swiped away. And I said when I was just saying, this is very important for the situation of peace, for the situation of war. These weapons are bad. And I think over the last 30 years, the weapon industry has evolved so much that these are really considered as very old-dated weapon. If it's David, you and I, we start now a technological war, and you come with big technologically advanced phones, and I'm bringing the satellite phone. I'm saying, this is what I'm going to fight with. It's that level of disadvantage and something that is so outdated and not relevant anymore.
It's a fascinating thing, Alma, that you say at one point, these weapons were an important part of, maybe important, small I, not capital I, but an important part of defense for certain wars and certain conflicts and so on. And I would imagine military men and women around the world would say the same thing today. And what we're seeing is countries stepping back because of this. And I'd love to hear both of you on this. Kasia, what does the ICBL say to someone on a panel discussion who stands up at a podium with a microphone and has a voice to say, we need these weapons? This is important for our way forward in order to defend the country we live in, the city, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we could go on about that at great rate, but the reality is there are millions of these weapons all over the world. And I think, Alma, it's not falling on deaf ears with me. Cruel and indiscriminate, I think, is for me one of the sound bites that I'm going to be taking away from our conversation today. But I think it's something that we all need to reflect on. Anyway, Kasia, I'm just wondering, how do you push back against that as an activist? You sign a petition. Great. Okay. That's helpful. What is the call to action at that point? Or is there one?
Well, what we say is banned means illegal. Banned is banned. These weapons were banned. They were banned back in 1997, and the ban took effect in 1999. It's a long time ago, and we are now, quarter past in the 21st century, and they are still banned because back in the 90s, all these experts, all these countries, and all the world and the international community, very well informed, evidence-based information, came to the conclusion that these weapons do not violate actually core principles of international humanitarian law, so the law of war, and they should never ever be used again, and they should just stop existing, like chemical weapons or biological weapons or nuclear weapons for that matter, because they just do not discriminate between their objects. So they are just flawed weapon that was banned because its humanitarian impact far outweighs any limited military utility that these weapons may offer. And they do offer some limited military utility. We cannot, I think, deny that. However, the equation just is not worth it, because the human cost and the long-term humanitarian impact is far greater. And because of this, the indiscriminate nature of these weapons just makes them illegitimate. So what we say is that these principles and these truths and facts have not changed. Basically, what we see now is this whole narrative is being politicized in this very current context of high tension, of high insecurity concerns in the region, especially bordering Russia. And we see a lot of fear, legitimate fear, of course. We understand that these are real concerns. And I myself, coming from a country that has a long and painful experience of being neighbor of Russia and still having family there, I understand that these fears are real and legitimate and rational. However, the response to these fears in trying to bring anti-personnel landmines as a solution to boost your defense and protect your people are flawed, are completely irrational, and just simply creating false sense of security. So we try to debunk that.
Why use them at all, in other words?
Absolutely. We tell these countries that conflict after conflict after conflict, including conflict in Europe, and Alma can talk more about it, including conflict in the former Yugoslavia, which was not that long ago, shortly, before the treaty was negotiated, showed now and again that these weapons actually create more problems, including for the users, than any benefits. And as Alma was mentioning, seeing, that demining efforts are still ongoing in parts of Bosnia, how many years after, 30 years after the war ended. For us, it looks like lessons unlearned, basically.
Lessons unlearned, yeah. History is repeating itself,
History
right?
is repeating itself.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, people don't remember. 20 years, people have changed, diplomats, decision makers. They've changed, and they just don't remember that we have already examined it, looked at it from all angles, and that was the conclusion. And we are now, they are trying to reinvent the wheel.
Feels like we're going back kind of to pre-1997. Alma, you made a question about, I think the word that came to my mind was archaic when you were talking about landmines. This is an old weapon. And Kasia, I think you've kind of confirmed this to some degree. I've heard people in the military say that once an area has been cleared, now the opposing, the enemy, the other side, if you want to polarize it that way, they now can get through. So in other words, it's a very limited deterrent anyway. Now I have no military background. So, if there was a soldier online here with us tonight, he'd probably be saying, well, David, you really don't know what you're talking about. But I remember visiting in China, the Great Wall, and, here this incredible fortress around this country. And what I learned is that if you bribed the guards at the gate, you could just walk right through. So in the same way, it seems to me, isn't that a good analogy for the uselessness of this particular weapon? Anyway, Alma, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that before we chatted about some of these countries that are stepping back, and talked a little bit more about the politicization of it all.
Maybe just to give a little bit of a reminder of why do we hate these anti-personnel mines so much? And it's just that they remain deadly and threat to civilians long after the conflict has ended. They do not disappear with peace treaties, and that's the problem. They stay there, and they're an obstacle not only for civilians but for the overall population, for the overall development of the country for years and decades, continuing to maim and kill indiscriminately. Children walking to school, farmers walking to their fields, and families returning to their homes are among the most common victims that we have seen over these decades. And we are still seeing. These weapons cause life-changing injuries, and these injuries are there for life. They're amputations, blindness, permanent disabilities. Survivors then often face long and difficult recoveries, which are limited to access to medical care that most of the time doesn't exist in these kind of countries. So beyond the human toll, landmines have these deep social economic consequences as well. They prevent communities from using the land for farming, so people to survive, to develop, to resettle, keeping people.
You're talking about infrastructure.
Absolutely. Keeping people in poverty and prolonging these displacements of people that cannot go home because their yards, their little gardens are shattered with unexploded ordnance or landmines. So they stay as a reminder of war, that people have to live it in peace. And we have been fighting against this for such a long time because we see that this is unprecedented and it's nothing that people should live with again. And for us, this is not only a policy reversal. I mean, Kasia was just talking about how do we confront, what kind of hidden message that we pull from our sleeve, because we were always talking about humanitarian consequences, but this is not enough anymore. We have to now talk about military strategies. We have to talk about how a landmine is useful in a military strategy or not. As a humanitarian worker, I hate to talk about what is a useful weapon. I just don't see that kind of narrative.
Talk about a contradiction, right?
Exactly. We don't see this as a strategic adjustment. It's not something that is there and that will go away. These decisions that states are making, these are the acts of moral vandalism. This is really a fake security promise to a population that is scared. We acknowledge that people in Finland, in Estonia, in Latvia, in Lithuania, and Poland, they are scared. But this is a fake security promise. It tells us that the world that was suffering, all these civilians, children, farmers, deminers that are dedicating their lives to clean this land, they're again now on a table for negotiation, right? Now we are again negotiating, is a landmine bad?
So
Alma, is it off as it was?
So this fake security. So is this just, okay, I hate to bring this back to economics, but is this laziness? Is this about money? Is this a cheap weapon that, as you say, provides some sort of, I don't know, George Orwellian-like kind of newspeak, if I can pull that reference out, the idea of a useful weapon, right? That's very newspeak from 1984, right? So is it just about that simply in some respects? This is easy, it's easier, and it's cheaper.
We can now speak for a whole day about how political leaders have disappointed us in general. And I think this kind of
that's a whole other podcast, by the way, Alma.
3 podcasts, 12
3 podcasts, that's right. That's right. Maybe we'll come back with that for our second series. Yeah.
Right. But I think this is just one example where states are trying to show that they are ready to defend, but what they are proposing is not something that is going to truly defend people. I'm always advocating for a political solution. I am coming from a war where we have fought each other's sides for 4 years, and until we were sat around the table to find a solution, it would last until now. So political solutions are those that we have to always. That's why I also really hate when somebody asks me, but what is the solution? I mean, if we cannot use landmines, what can we use? Well, sit around the table and find a political solution and protect your civilians by leading these discussions and narratives that are not focused on armaments. Let's buy more weapons. Let's buy strongest bombs. Let's be ready to bomb each other. No, let's totally reverse this conversation because it's getting very toxic.
Kasia, what do you think the bigger risks are globally for some of these countries? These, I guess it is it 5 right now currently that have stepped back or are stepping back? Are you worried about a domino-like effect? Is that a bigger concern? Could you talk about that a wee bit?
Yes, totally. It is a real concern. So for the moment, we have 5 countries that are withdrawing and they're unstoppable. They wouldn't hear any evidence, any arguments, any lessons from history. They are just blindly going for it. because it was decided at a high political level without any expertise input, and basically they are doing this. But in a way, this is already the domino effect. Last year, we saw Lithuania withdrawing from the sister convention on cluster munitions. That was the very first precedent of a country withdrawing from a disarmament treaty. And we were hugely concerned already at that time. And we were speaking to Lithuania saying, this is not only about you, but this is also about the consequences and the potential effect it might have on a much broader community here. And they were pretty certain that this is a one-off and nothing is going to happen. And also we were reassured by many that, okay, cluster munitions is a very different story, different weapon, different treaty, but landmines, no one ever would be thinking about going backwards on anti-personnel landmines. And here we are, half a year later, having 5 countries in the daylight out there withdrawing from this treaty and hearing different rumors that there might be others that will follow. So yes, we are hugely concerned because, once something was done and they showed that it can be done, then it really weakens the taboo, I would say, and the norm and everything else around it. It was shown that it can be done. So that's extremely dangerous. We are very concerned about it, and we are trying to do everything to prevent that scenario with more countries going into this, following this blind path. So there is a lot at stake. Also, we are now hearing, especially from Finland, from Poland, about plans, intention of actually reintroducing production of anti-personnel landmines. Can you imagine this? In the middle of Europe, in the European Union, in those democracies, trying to produce something that was decided back last century that it was a relic of the past and should just never be used, never be thought about. So this is a real fear. Once these mines are produced again, of course, we fear that it will get into all the different other places in the world, and that we will see again a proliferation of this weapon around the world. And also with the steps from the European countries, we wonder, why would an African country having an unfriendly neighbor, what would stop them from thinking, the Europeans can use it, why can't we use it? Why can't we withdraw from the treaty when we need it?
Well, Alma, you talked about moral vandalism. To me, as a philosopher, I'm interested in the moral argument here. If there's not an economic one, why isn't there? Can't we look at virtue ethics here and say, hang on a minute here, there are good reasons. I've done a lot of work personally in Cambodia for the last 20 some years, and I've worked very closely with landmine survivors. And I don't think I've been on a trip in over 20 years where I haven't met somebody new whose life as a farmer, largely an agrarian society, has been impacted by landmines or unexploded ordnance of one kind or another. And so to say that it's still a risk is just such a massive understatement, as you both know so well. Alma, I saw you nodding when Kasia was chatting. It sounds like you had a comment that you wanted to step in there.
It's not rare that Kasia and I agree on everything that we say on podcasts, and that's a good sign, believe me. But she mentioned at the end something that I also want to bring into the conversation, and that's linked, David, to your previous question about economic benefits. What would be the worst case scenario, and this is where we are now challenging state parties to the Mine Ban Treaty, is to draw that red line, to say this is the red line, security threats in case of these 5 countries are the red lines, and there is nothing else that can be stepped over. And my worst nightmare is that somebody will think about economic opportunities and say, but there are so few countries that are producing landmines. Is this an economic opportunity for us? So let's ditch the Mine Ban Treaty. Let's get into the production and let's just deal them around Europe to everybody who wants them. And Kasia also mentioned Poland and Finland announcing plans to say that they're ready to produce landmines. Poland said 1 million landmines. So we know we have this figure, more or less, that it takes around $3 to produce a landmine. It takes around $1,000 to clear it. So it will push us to poverty. It will push states to poverty, to trying to get rid of this problem because
that's a mind-boggling statistic. I mean,
exactly.
I'm getting goosebumps for the wrong reason now.
Sorry. Maybe by the end of the conversation, we can find something positive coming out of all of this.
No, what I think you touch on something that I absolutely wanted to chat about as well, and that is the funding cuts that we've seen happen in the U.S. with USAID, and how some other countries have kind of followed suit to some degree to say, again, Kasia, to pick up where you left off, well, if they can do it, so can we. And I've always said that we don't need any more reasons to think about ourselves. Instead of giving more, or coming alongside in a more proactive way, what we're doing is we're stepping back, it seems, from a funding point of view. Kasia, could you talk a little bit about what the funding freezes that are currently occurring could have these real-time impacts that could be happening in places like Cambodia and the Ukraine and other places around the world?
Sure. And as one of my colleagues said, we are in a perfect storm with the needs growing by the day. Also now, hearing about the plans to produce, to use more than before. And then at the same time, funding for this very important work, both for mine action, for removing mines, for assisting survivors, but also for financing advocacy and campaigning and those who speak up and raise awareness about this. This is all being cut. So at the same, our voices are, and our work is needed greater than ever. And at the same time, the available funding is shrinking. You're asking about the potential impact. This has already had impact. We are hearing from many country programs, from many mine action programs, from many of ICBL member organizations that basically they were left with very little or nothing from day 1 to 2. Some of them are still in the process of seeing whether this some of the funding might be reinstalled or might be brought back. Some of them have been informed that some of the programs are just going to be shut down. And so this is a huge deal, and this is something that really is cutting our fundamental basis. And it's hugely concerning, including for countries like Cambodia. Cambodia also has relied heavily on the U.S. funding. We believe, rightly so, the U.S. should be and should continue funding programs in Cambodia as Southeast Asia, where it has contributed largely to the existing problem. So we hope it will not go away. We hope that that after the review is done in the US, the funding will come back to its full extent, but probably this will not be true for all the places. Hopefully Southeast Asia will be spared from that, but many African countries are going to suffer. We see that already. And the domino effect is also, of course, present here as we see other major donors of mine action following suit and also reducing their funding. And this funding is probably diverted now to defense and security needs. So this is really not really uplifting conversation.
No, I know.
I'm afraid. Very
no,
little,
for sure.
Very little, news.
Well, I think Kasia, what you said too, just partially because I know, I mean, I've worked in many countries around the world, but really focused on Cambodia in the last 20 or so. And your comment about being a part of the actual problem that currently they're facing today. When you look at unexploded ordnance in the country and how many bombs were dropped in the late 60s and the 70s, we're talking about April 17th, 1975, 50 yeyears ago, the Khmer Rouge invaded Phnom Penh, right? And that was after 5 years of civil war and so on. And we could talk, there's a whole other series of a podcast, Alma, that we should be. I think what we've laid out here is basically a future in podcasting together, the three of us.
That's good.
That's right. That's right. Very impressive. But to say that it's still impacting, I mean, it's there. You do not have to go far to realize what an incredible disproportionate impact. And I think the phrase for me, Alma and Kasia, while you were both chatting, is lost opportunity that as a result of going into production. But what does the future hold? Well, we need to look back and see, how that can impact us now, in the present.
David, I would not be that diplomatic. I would say that it's really stupid. It's not stupid.
You can use 4-letter words if you want. At least they're 4 letters in English anyway.
Okay, I'll just stick to stupid because can you imagine that you are voluntarily planning to actually produce and then use anti-personnel landmines on your own land?
Yeah. To say that it's heartbreaking is also an understatement. And I know that sounds like the activist in me coming out, but I think foolish is great. Stupid is good too. And I think there's lots of four-word like adjectives we could add to that too. Alma, I'm just wondering, and listen, I could go on for 2 to 3 hours in this conversation easily. I really could. We really probably should wrap soon, but I wondered, in the face of this sort of donors pulling back, countries pulling back, and so on, how do you think smaller countries, how do you think NGOs and individuals can actually step in? Is it just about advocacy? Is it just about signing petitions? Are there other ways? I'm not looking for the solution because I think it's pretty layered. I think it's pretty layered, and it's going to be political, and it's going to be relational, and it's going to be militaristic and all those things. But are there things that we can do?
Oh, absolutely. There are so many things that can be done, and we are really counting on the civilian mobilization. Citizens have to know that now it's up to them. It's really in their hands on how much they are going to accept this. I'm sitting right now in Belgium. Today was a national-wide strike about funding policies that are also being cut on the healthcare, social benefits. They're going somewhere in a direction where citizens don't want to see that. I think what citizens have to understand is that we have to remind them all the time that all the decisions that are made on their behalf, they can challenge. They have parliamentarians that they have to speak. Even if we're talking about small communities, these are political parties. They have to talk to parliamentarians. Every time they see them in a local bar, say, hey, what are you doing about not only landmines, but all these negative changes that my country is making, all these political decisions and funding cuts and making basically our life in this country fragile and not so secure anymore. So we have to go back to the citizens and ask them for their mobilization. Signing a petition is always great, but also we as civil society organizations, we have been relying too much on state funding, and that's a mistake. That we knew that it was a fragile strategy. We knew that it was something, and we were building as an NGOs also different strategies where to collect funds to do the work that we are doing. And I think this private fundraising and again participation from citizens is extremely important because it gives us even more power to act, to be more vocal, to be more straightforward, and to demand from these states to not make the decisions that they have been making. But the funding cuts that Kasia was talking about really made a huge impact on the operations of so many civil society organizations. They took bread from those deminers that were working on clearing landmines because that was also a job that they did. So it's not good. Right now, I don't have really a positive perspective ahead of me, but I'm hoping that again, as much as some states are pulling back, other states will step up. And this is the balance that we are hoping to see in the future.
And maybe can I say maybe certain countries, certain politicians, certain policymakers, people, individuals, philanthropists, maybe it's about trying to grow that, not interest, but influence, I suppose.
Yes, exactly.
And I mean, I've been doing this podcasting thing for about 10 or 11 years. I love a great conversation, but it's got to lead to something else, it seems to me. Right?
Exactly.
You've got to plant a seed. So you ask a good question, hopefully, and it goes somewhere that maybe you didn't expect. And maybe there's a revelation. And that's what I always hope and trust is going to happen with these types of conversations as well, that somebody's going to hear this and say, okay, a seed's been planted. I got goosebumps. I want to get involved. Right. And I am hopeful about that, but I'm with you. It seems like a pretty dark time, I suppose. But I think this leads nicely into a kind of a final question, which I'm sorry, it has to be the final question, and I'm hoping maybe we can do a part 2. It sounds like we have quite a podcasting career ahead of us. And I'd love to hear from both of you on this. Kasia, why do you still, after so many years, with all the ups and the downs and the difficulties and the challenges, and I'm going to assume here that you get out of bed in the morning with your sleeves rolled up and usually a smile saying, okay, today's a good day and we're going to make some progress today. Is that how you get out of bed mostly? And if so, how do you maintain a sense of hope and purpose for the future?
Yes, totally. Well, we are still very positive, and I do get up with lots of adrenaline and ready for a fight every day.
Nice.
Every day. And really, the past half a year was really every day, because we were learning every day a new piece of information, a new country withdrawing, and so on. So there is this sense of like purpose right now, much stronger than even before, because now you see that you're like your legacy is being questioned. Everything
right.
you have worked on is being questioned by some, let's say, not very well-informed politicians who think they can announce stupid things and just, question all of this that was built for decades by many people around the world. So there was a strong feeling of, common purpose, and a need to be even more vocal and stronger and fight together. And what gives us hope, I think, is all the people around the world that have been working on this, all the people that have been affected, all those that really know, that we are right and they are wrong. And we need to make sure that we will win this battle again. Okay, and maybe we will lose a battle here and there, but I think we will win this war. I think it's a great opportunity. Many people have, not you, me, and Alma, we have been with Landmines every day, but for a regular person, for like just common people, Landmines indeed have moved to the past, and many have forgotten that there are still great needs around the world to ensure that land is clear and victim assistance and these mines are not used again. And now with all this news, this negative news, I think we also have a great opportunity to put spotlight on this, that how important it is and how dangerous it is that if you stop watching, stop talking about it, and stop explaining, very quickly we may end up in the situation where we're back in the 90s when it was a global crisis. So I think we all already have seen it, I think, throughout the ICBL, that people are now much more re-energized, activated, determined to protect the treaty, to protect the ban, to fight for this together. So in a way, I think it's kind of a season 2 of ICBL and the Mine Ban Treaty. And I'm sure that at the end we will again come out of it as winners, and will bring the rest to follow us. It may take some years. It took me over 10 years to bring on board my own country, Poland, that is now withdrawing. I think I am ready to do it again, and hopefully with a new younger generation joining our forces. And also on the funding, of course, relying on donors' funding, on states' funding, it might be a bit tricky. But at the same time, this is states' obligation in the treaty to provide funding, to provide cooperation and assistance for all this important work. So they are not really doing a charity. They are not doing us a favor. This is their obligation. And I think we need to continue reminding them that this is one of their obligations, as many others, but this also is one of their obligations, and they need to find the resources, and it needs to be among their priorities. And I think that's also one of our roles, to not let them, sleep off these obligations while they are focusing on security, defense, and everything else. But also this needs to remain on their agendas. Thanks.
Alma, you said, I think you've used the phrase not so positive. Are you hopeful, though, still?
Most of the time, I'm also very positive.
Most of the time, nice.
Yes. When I was talking about certain aspect, I was getting a little bit into a negative mood. I feel a little bit like Sisyphus these days. We are rolling that rock uphill, and then if we just feel that we are there, it kind of goes down. And I think Kasia's example of bringing Poland 10 years and now getting back and then doing it again, it's exactly what we are doing. But there is never a dull day in the work that we do. You might wake up, there is a new war coming up, and then you have to just kind of deprioritize everything that you have been doing before and focus on that specific aspect. We will never give up on the fight that we do. We will keep talking louder. And those who would normalize this horror again have to understand that even where there will be a zero funding, we will not be silent. And that's something that we have to remind them. We have to remind the world the fight against landmines was never just a campaign. It was really, and it still is, a moral imperative. And this is something that we have to continue to build this normative together, because we know very well what these landmines are, who uses them, how they work, and we also know who they hurt the most. So we cannot, even that's as if it's a determination that to pull that rock up the hill as many times as possible, but we have to get back that message to the core.
Sleeves are rolled up and the rock continues to move up the mountain. Yeah, that's a great reference and a great way to look at it. And well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time and just to chat about some of these issues and about so many important issues, really, with this theme in mind. And really, it's about humanitarian work and it's about advocacy, but it really is just about, I think, at the risk of sounding a little trite, about creating a safer world. It really is. And I think, having been on the ground in so many countries around the world that have suffered from landmines, it is about opportunity and about the simple fact that a farmer and their families may not be able to work the land. And I think we can all understand that on some level. So listen, what a pleasure meeting you both. And I look forward to another conversation. And please listen to our other episodes. This is Silent Killers. Kasia, Alma, what a pleasure having you here today. Thanks for diving deeper with me.
Thank you so much, David. It was a great pleasure and a lot of fun. Really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next time we should meet on something more positive, some trends that will lift us up a little bit. Thank you so much for following this.
It's been great having you here with us. Well, there you have it. That was Kasia Derlicka-Rosenbauer and Alma Taslidzan here with us on the show, and talking about things that matter to them and to things that matter to all of us, really. And this is the thing I've learned after so many years of podcasting, of interviewing people, of spending time getting to know others online in conversation and building community with others as well around the world. I've learned that these stories really do matter, and they're meaningful and they're relevant. And this one, landmines, disarmament, advocating on behalf of the world's most vulnerable in so many different ways and shapes and forms, is so important. It's so essential. It's rooted in the other. It's rooted in looking a little closer and just digging a little deeper. And for me, the idea of silent killers, that these are indiscriminate, that these are hidden, that these are under the surface, is just such a metaphor for so many other things. In our conversation today, we talked about the human cost of landmines. We talked about the impact that cuts are having on advocacy. And I think, though, the thing that really stands out for me is that even though there are challenges, and even though there are things and people and political waves that are pushing back, the important thing is to maintain a sense of hope, to roll up the sleeves and to step in. And so Alma and Kasia were just fun to chat with. I learned a great deal, and I'm assuming that I'm going to continue to do that on this podcast and in this series, and I hope you will too. Stay tuned. Episode 3 is coming up, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it with family and friends. Socially mediate the heck out of this. This is a partnership between the International Campaign to Ban Landmines and Face to Face. You're listening here to Silent Killers, and my name is David Peck.